Hey guys, we have been enjoying Portugal and I'm getting ready to start sharing our experience in Portugal. But before we get into that, I wanted to recap what happened to us as we flew to Milan. So last week we flew from Phoenix to JFK, and then we had a flight from JFK to Milan, and we were going to the Salone Design Show. We ended up making it there, but almost 16 hours later, we landed than we were supposed to land. And if you guys saw on the news, so on Tuesday, I think it was, Monday, Tuesday? Saturday? No. Monday or Tuesday, we flew into Milan.
You're right. We had a wedding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Monday or Tuesday, an article came out in the news, in the national news, that a flight flew from JFK on its way to Milan, and halfway to Milan, it turned around and went back to JFK because there was an unruly passenger on the flight. And so that was our flight, which was really insane. Never thought something like that would happen to us.
Not just our flight. It was the guy right behind us.
The row behind us.
On a huge plane. It was the guy right behind us.
So we need to fill everyone in on what actually happened, because if you watch the news article, they make it seem like this passenger tried to storm the cockpit and was like being detained by the flight attendant. It was they definitely news. They definitely made it to what they wanted it to be. So what really happened was we were in our row. We kind of hear like a disagreement in the row behind us.
Slight disagreement. We're the only ones that noticed. No one else on the
plane. No, it wasn't
knows.
causing a scene. It was a disagreement between the passenger and the flight attendant about their food that they had specifically ordered for their dietary restriction. And I guess they didn't get that specific order correct. And this passenger was not complying with the flight attendant. The flight attendant was asking for his boarding pass, and he didn't want to give it to her, and he was asking her for her name. And so the passenger was definitely being like out of line, but in no way, shape, or form was he unsafe to the flight or to other passengers, or even to the flight attendant. I mean, he was staying in his seat. And so during this conversation, and Brett and I are hearing it because we're directly in front of him, but even like the other person in our row didn't even know what was going on. Like we were just actively listening. And the flight attendant starts saying, if you don't comply, we're going to have to land this plane or turn this plane around. And Brett and I at this point are like, no way in hell. So at this point, we are halfway to Milan. So we are like 3.5 hours into the flight. We have like 3 hours left. And
over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There's nowhere to land.
We're literally over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There's nowhere to land the plane. The closest place is like Canada, which isn't even that far from JFK. So like we knew we were going to have to go back to JFK. Or we were hoping, if there's an issue with him, can we land in Milan still, and can they figure it out with him there? So this flight attendant is threatening that the plane's going to have to land or be turned around, and she's asking him, is this what you want? And he's saying, no, this is not what I want. And again, he's just being a little bit difficult, but he eventually takes out his boarding pass.
Yeah, he was uncooperative. They asked for his name. He gave his name.
And he eventually gave his name, yes.
She asked for his boarding pass, which he was asking for her name before he gave his boarding pass. Somewhat reasonable of a request. Also, hand over your boarding pass, but also, why is it so hard to give your name as a flight attendant? This flight attendant was very power hungry, as you'll learn in a second.
So also, he was sitting next to his wife and their newborn baby. Like, he was not a threat to anyone. So anyway, so the flight attendant leaves after saying like, hey, we're going to have to turn this plane around if you are not complying. And then a few minutes later, he gets up, and I see him walk towards the front of the plane. He was just walking. I didn't see him running. I didn't see him try to do anything.
And he had his boarding passes, and he was looking for a different flight attendant.
So I think he was looking for another flight attendant. So, and I was just watching him because I just wanted to be aware of what was going on. I was not concerned by his behavior at all, walking towards the front of the plane. And then a couple of minutes later, he walks back. He sits back in his seat. And then the pilot comes on the speaker and says, because the seatbelt light is on, if you get up it's a federal offense. So at that point, I think they were clearly signaling to him, like, do not get up out of your seat. But they were just telling the whole plane, if you get out of your seat when the seatbelt light is on, it's a federal offense, so please stay in your seat.
Mind you, most of the plane's asleep. The other half is watching TV. No one knows there's a situation going on.
Because there's no situation.
Except for when I tell Caitlin, they're going to turn this plane around and we're going to have to go back to JFK.
So I'm like, there's no way. Like, I can't believe this is happening. And we're listening because we're like, this is so stupid. He's not, again, why like ruin it for 400 people?
He's a pain in the ass passenger, and it's a power-hungry flight attendant. And that's what this came down to.
So then, like 30 minutes later, I think, like 20 or 30 minutes later, we feel the plane start turning around, Brett and I, and no one else on the plane knows what's going on.
Not a single soul.
Like
no one knows.
The guy that potentially was the issue of why we were turning around didn't even know we were turning around or that we were turning around because of him. Like, so we feel the plane start turning, and we see on the flight map that the plane literally makes a 180, and we see that the flight route, instead of going to Milan, has now turned around to JFK. Again, we're 3.5 hours into the flight in the middle of the night.
And then, poof, they cut the flight tracker.
The flight tracker
gaslight us.
Gets cut off. No one anymore has access to the flight tracker of where we're going. And I happened to take a photo of this flight tracker right when the plane turned around and it showed we were heading back to JFK. No one else, we didn't see anyone else notice this because people were sleeping or people didn't have the flight tracker on.
And you couldn't really feel we were turning. You had to be looking to know that we turned. It's a big plane. You don't really feel much. And sure enough, they turn around, they cut the flight tracker, they cut the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, they cut the Wi-Fi, so we couldn't access Wi-Fi.
And they do not announce a thing.
For like 20 minutes.
And literally only because we told the guy, the Italian in our row, they're turning this plane around. And he knew just enough English to understand what that meant.
And he starts getting upset, like, why are we turning around? He starts telling his friends in the row next to us. So then he's, like, telling them, we just turned around, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's confused. Then it's like spreading. Like, everyone, like, you start to hear people talking. People are like, what's going on? The flight did not tell anyone. They didn't come on the loudspeaker for at least 20 minutes after we had turned around and started going towards JFK to tell everyone that we were going to go back to JFK.
And I don't even know how long it would have taken for them to tell us that.
If people weren't, like, talking and, like, what's going on. They were asking flight attendants, what's going on? Are we going back to JFK? Why are we doing that? And so it was crazy. Like, they turn around, they cut the flight map, they cut the Wi-Fi, and then they don't tell anyone what's going on. Like, if I had seen the flight turn around and do that, and I didn't know what was going on, I would have been freaking out.
But instead, they come on the loudspeaker and say, we are turning around and going back to JFK because there is a technical issue with this flight.
Technical issue with the flight.
Yes, and if you've been paying attention to the news lately, it's a scary time to fly. I mean, there's a lot of issues with airplanes, helicopters, and people are afraid. I mean, obviously we travel a lot and we're fairly comfortable with planes, but if I was in a different part of the plane and had no idea why we were turning around and I was told it was for a technical issue, I'd be a little nervous if I am over the ocean and have 4 hours to the nearest airport.
So once they say there's a technical issue with the flight, again, people start freaking out because they think there's a maintenance issue with the plane. So the girl behind us, in the row behind us, who was in the row with the person that is the reason we're turning this plane around, is like so concerned that there's something wrong with the plane that we actually have to explain to her that the reason we're turning around is because of the guy in your row. And like, that's how little of a scene this guy had made, is that she was in his row and didn't even know. He didn't even know that we were turning around because of him. That after all of this kind of settled and everyone like accepted the fact that we were going back to JFK, even though people were literally in tears, like people were crying, people were upset, everyone was pissed. He ended up like literally going to sleep. Like, he was not a threat to the plane. He went to sleep. Everybody just had to accept it.
And meanwhile, close to probably an hour, somewhat around that time frame, went by, and people are still wondering what's going on with this plane. Mm-hmm. And only because I told a flight attendant,
you should tell people,
listen,
like, people are really concerned about the plane. Can you tell everyone that we're safe?
Right.
And so she's like, thank you for the advice. So they come on a loudspeaker and they say, hey guys, we said that there was a technical issue with the flight, not with the aircraft. The aircraft is perfectly fine, and we are safe, and we are doing this because we have to, something.
This was a huge failure by American Airlines. Yes, this passenger was a pain in the ass, and yes, he should have been detained and probably banned from American, but to impact the lives of hundreds of people, absolutely ridiculous. And then on top of that, all the flight attendants that you're dealing with, all the training and everything. There wasn't one flight attendant who thought, maybe we shouldn't tell them there's a technical issue and not reassure them that everyone's safe. Literally, the entire plane was freaking out. We would be too if we didn't know what was going on. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't take a random passenger from Arizona to tell you, let people know that they're safe.
Like, we also heard from a passenger after we got off the flight that he said he felt so much better once they came on the speaker saying that there was not an issue with the aircraft and that we were safe.
Out.
And that was literally because Brett told the flight attendant that that's like somebody should let everyone know. That's because we knew why we were turning around and no one else really knew.
Yeah, I think it mainly falls on the one power-hungry flight attendant who refused to give her name and really wanted to show her power and turn this plane around, and she certainly did. But it is on the flight crew and American Airlines for not training their people better to be able to handle someone like this, because I could have diffused the situation. This guy was not a threat. But also to reassure all of your innocent customers to make sure that they're safe. And it's just a huge failure and an unbelievable inconvenience. Certainly for us. I mean, we lost a day of our vacation, but first world problems for us. There are other people who, had places, connections, and they have families, and they have, other things that they have to get to that are even more important than what we were going to Italy for. But it's a huge inconvenience and a big failure on American Airlines' part.
So then once we start getting towards JFK, and by the way, they never fed us food. So they said on the loudspeaker multiple times, like, do not get out of your seat, do not unbuckle your seatbelt. Like, they literally were basically like, don't move, and we're not going to feed you, we're not going to give you water. Like, literally gave us absolutely nothing on an 8-hour flight.
I didn't go to the bathroom one time.
No one was, so everybody was afraid to get out of their chair because we were going to get yelled at. And then, again, no food, no water. So then before we land, of course, they tell everyone, like, when we land, do not unbuckle your seatbelt. We'll let you know when it's okay to do that. We're going to deplane. Never once said that they're trying to work on rescheduling our flight or any, like, literally no information. Everybody was like, what the hell is going on? So by the time we land back at JFK, it's 2 or 3 a.m.
It's like 3:30.
Yeah, it's the middle of the night. No one has, like, had any food or water.
There's nothing open.
So we land, the supervisor comes onto the flight and literally asks him to get up out of his chair and come with them. And he gets up.
No problem. He
complies.
said, thank you for being nice to me.
He said, thanks for being nice. He gets up, his wife, their baby, they literally walk off the plane, and everybody on the plane is, like, clapping because they're just, like, no one knows really what the situation
they assume it's this a-hole's fault, which it really is, but the reason we turn around, I'll give half the blame to him.
We did not need to turn around.
But American Airlines deserves at least half.
We land at 2 a.m. No, we don't know what's going on. We don't know when we're going to get back to Milan. We're trying to rebook another flight because no one's giving us information, which we ended up booking another flight, and then we had to cancel it and try to get refunded, and we're working on that. But so we get off the flight, and everyone's getting in line at the desk because everyone's trying to figure out what is going on. We're like, we need to get our checked baggage.
We were in the back of the plane, so there's
so we get off towards the end. We're like, where do we get our checked bags? And they're like, oh no, the bags are going to stay on the flight. Like, your flight's leaving, it's going to now leave at 10 a.m. So over 7 hours later. But again, they didn't tell anyone that. So then we have to start telling people because...
Well, no, I asked the question to the person at the desk. And of course, after I asked the question, then they think to announce, oh yeah, your bags are staying on the plane. You have a flight at 10 a.m. It's like, why am I prompting these questions?
So then we're like, okay, everybody is like, we have 7 hours, over 7 hours until this flight is going to leave again. No one has their bags. None of the food places are open.
No hotel provided.
No hotel is provided. There's nowhere to lay down.
The chairs all have armrests, so you can't lay down in the airport.
You can't take a nap. Like, literally, there's nothing to do. So we ended up literally, like, we waited until 5 a.m. when the American Express lounge opened, where we were able to get some breakfast, and then basically just sat in a chair for several hours after that.
We took a half-hour nap in the Amex lounge. Yeah. Sorry about that.
So then we go back to the gate to board, and we're getting ready to board, and then they come on and say, oh, we haven't been able to get the plane cleaned yet, so now your flight is delayed.
Basically another hour delay until we actually boarded.
And I think everyone at this point was like a zombie in the airport and just wanted to get to Milan. So then we finally leave at like 11:30 a.m., go to Milan. We finally go straight there. We make it there. We land. And so we landed at like
1 a.m.-ish.
1 a.m. Milan time. So we basically landed like 16 hours delayed. We were not offered any meal credit, hotel, like absolutely nothing from American Airlines.
Yeah.
And
everything you're seeing in the big headlines, and it made big headlines, it's really mostly fabricated, and it's really unfortunate because it's helping American Airlines justify why they did that, but it was a complete failure. And again, first world problems, but really just masterclass in how not to handle an annoying passenger.
And the new flight crew on the plane to Milan was incredible, amazing. We loved them. They did a great job.
Got the meals that we were promised.
We got fed. And so thankfully that worked out, but it was, we lost like about a third of our trip to visit showrooms for work, and just disappointing on the whole situation. So we wanted to tell the real truth of what happened, and don't listen to everything on the news.
Yeah, American, if you really care, you could talk to people who are right there next to the situation instead of interviewing passengers who were in business class in the front of the plane who knew nothing about this story. So if you really care, you could talk to us, and then you could give us first class for life. Thanks.